Who really wrote the book of Deuteronomy in the Bible? That's a question that has sparked countless debates and discussions among scholars, historians, and religious enthusiasts alike. You see, tradition dictates that Moses, yes, the same Moses who led the Israelites out of Egypt, is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, including the book of Deuteronomy. But, as it often happens with history and tradition, there are skeptics, those who question this age-old belief and propose alternative theories of authorship. They point to certain inconsistencies, to details that seem out of place if Moses was indeed the author. One of their most compelling arguments, the fact that Moses' death is recorded in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. It's a conundrum that has puzzled many a mind. But if Moses wrote Deuteronomy, how is his death recorded in the last chapter? A fascinating question indeed. Let's delve deeper. Traditionally, Moses is considered the author of Deuteronomy, but where does this belief come from? Let's dig a little deeper. The Bible itself provides evidence that supports Mosaic authorship. For instance, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 31, it's reported that Moses wrote this law and delivered it to the Levitical priests. This suggests that Moses indeed had a significant role in the production of this text. Furthermore, the language and style of Deuteronomy align with the other 4 books attributed to Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. There's a consistency in the narrative voice, the depiction of events, and the theological perspectives that thread these books together. This stylistic consistency lends credibility to the tradition that Moses was the primary author. However, acknowledging Moses as the author doesn't necessarily imply that he penned every single word in these books. This understanding is particularly relevant when we consider the final chapter of Deuteronomy. Chapter 34 records the death of Moses, an event he obviously couldn't have written about himself. But does this mean we reject the entire tradition of Mosaic authorship? Not at all. The belief in Mosaic authorship accommodates the possibility of later additions or edits. It's plausible that subsequent writers, under divine inspiration, may have completed the story of Moses after his death. This doesn't compromise the integrity of the text, but rather enriches it, providing a bridge to the next phase of Israel's journey in the book of Joshua. The tradition of Moses being the author of Deuteronomy, and indeed the whole Pentateuch, is deeply rooted in biblical history and theology. It's a belief that has stood the test of time and continues to inform our understanding of these ancient texts. So, if Moses didn't write the last chapter, who did? There are several theories to explain the authorship of Deuteronomy's final chapter. One of these theories, as presented in the article from Answers in Genesis, suggests that the last chapter of Deuteronomy could actually be considered the first chapter of Joshua. This theory posits that the transition between the 2 books is seamless, with the narrative flowing naturally from one book to the other. This perspective allows for the possibility that Moses penned the majority of Deuteronomy, with the subsequent narrative in Joshua being a continuation of the story. Another theory proposed is that another writer, perhaps Joshua himself or a diligent scribe, completed the story of Moses after his death under divine inspiration. This theory is not as far-fetched as it might initially sound. The Bible is replete with instances of divine inspiration guiding the hands of its writers, and this could very well have been the case with the final chapter of Deuteronomy. This theory maintains the sanctity of Mosaic authorship for the majority of the text, while providing a plausible explanation for the account of Moses' death. It's crucial to note that these theories, while they may differ in their specifics, do not in any way alter the truth of Scripture. The authenticity and authority of the Bible do not hinge on the identity of the human hands that penned its words. Rather, it rests on the divine inspiration that guided those hands, maintaining the integrity of the message throughout. Whether Moses wrote every word, or his narrative was completed by another under divine guidance, the core belief in the Mosaic authorship of Deuteronomy remains. The essence of the teachings, the wisdom imparted, and the spiritual guidance provided by the book remains the same. Regardless of who penned the last words, the message and teachings of Deuteronomy remain unchanged. The question of who wrote Deuteronomy's final chapter is intriguing, isn't it? We've journeyed through the traditional belief that Moses, the faithful servant of God, penned down the first 5 books of the Bible, including Deuteronomy. We've pondered upon the solid foundation that supports this belief, considering the consistency of Moses' voice and perspective throughout the text. We then navigated through a sea of alternative theories, exploring the possibility of another writer, completing the story of Moses after his death under divine inspiration. We also ventured into the idea of viewing the last chapter of Deuteronomy as the opening chapter of Joshua, an approach that resolves the apparent contradiction without altering the text or its truth. But ultimately, the exact authorship doesn't change the book's teachings or its role in the Bible. The heart of Deuteronomy remains the same, a guide for